It's almost impossible to imagine a bigger story in cable news or even in American media generally than the announcement by Fox News this morning that came very abruptly and without any explanation that Tucker Carlson is no longer employed at Fox News and his highest rated program, Tucker Carlson Show at 8 p.m., will no longer appear on that network. As I said, there will be certainly a lot of reporting that emerges over the next few days, and we will try and do a lot of that exposes exactly what the most proximate causes were, not just of what led to the separation, but why it happened in this way. There was no announcement that Tucker's last show would be in several weeks. There was no explanation provided by Fox or by Tucker today about exactly what it is that happened. It's somewhat shrouded in mystery exactly what the events were over the last few days that led to this unexpected decision. And clearly, given not just that it happened, but how it happened, it's almost certainly the case that it was not amiable. Amiable separations after 5 or 6 years with the network come with a lot of fanfare, a lot of positive things that they say about one another, vague reasons why it's happening, and most importantly of all, an end date that gives the host an opportunity to speak one last time to his audience about the reasons he's leaving and what it might be that he would be doing in the future. Even Brian Stelter, after he was fired by CNN despite having no audience or because he had no audience, was given that opportunity that's generally customary. The fact that Tucker is just taken off the air abruptly with no opportunity to even speak one last time to his audience is a pretty strong sign that whatever happened with some degree of acrimony and some degree of animus. And I'm a little bit constrained to be perfectly transparent in my ability to speculate on why that is. It's Tucker Show is one on which I often appear, along with other Fox shows like Laura Ingraham and Jesse Waters and Howie Kurtz's media show on Sunday. And Tucker is a friend of mine, and so I'm reluctant to do anything like speak for him or speculate based on things I know as part of those more personal conversations. As I said, though, reporting in terms of finding out inside Fox, finding out what happened is certainly something I've been doing all day and will continue to do, and will report on what I learn as soon as I'm able. No media reports today have tried to shine any light on what might have caused this separation. And Tucker has, at least as of this moment, not spoken out at all publicly in terms of what took place. So until he does, and until there's more reporting that's reliable, not reporting that comes from hostile news organizations like CNN or anonymous sources in the New York Times, we should assume that we don't yet know the precipitating events over the last few days. But there are certainly things that are worth analyzing and meaning that we can derive from the fact that this happened the way that it happened. So what I want to begin with is the simple fact that Tucker Carlson's program was simply like any other program that appears on cable news, and that I would suggest has ever appeared on cable news. It is a widespread perception among the few viewers that CNN has, or the readers that the New York Times has, or people who follow the Democratic Party, that Fox News is this monolith, that the American right and Republican Party is a monolith, that they all believe the same things about everything, that it's a cult of Donald Trump, that there's no criticism ever aired of Donald Trump. Something that you have to be completely ignorant in order to believe. Tucker Carlson's show by itself is living proof, a breathing testament to how much vibrant and often sharp debate there is within Republican Party politics and the broader American conservative movement. And one of the reasons why people who are left liberals and followers of the Democratic Party and who only get their information from the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and NBC News have no conception of these debates on the right is because there is none on the left, meaning the mainstream left, the mainstream liberal left. There was just a report in Politico 10 days ago on the career trajectory of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who you may remember branded herself when she ran in 2018 as a primary challenger to Joe Crowley, who many suspected might be Nancy Pelosi's successor to lead the Democratic Party. She branded herself an insurgent of the Democratic Party, a critic of the Democratic Party as much as the Republican Party. Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign as well described itself as leading a political revolution, not against the Republican Party, but against the establishment wings of both parties, particularly the Democratic Party. And yet in 2020, when Bernie Sanders' campaign was sabotaged by the Democratic establishment, just as it was in 2016, he didn't express real anger about that fact. He didn't urge his supporters to rise up and protest to the Democratic establishment. He instead instructed them all that they should do what he was about to do, which was fall obediently and loyally into line behind Joe Biden and the Democrats. And that's exactly what Bernie Sanders proceeded to do. As a reward, he became the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. When is the last time you heard Bernie Sanders say anything that alienates or is contrary to the core agenda of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party? The same exact path was followed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to the point that Politico just this week, or last week, celebrated her, rewarded her, patted her on the head, because it announced that AOC is now a, quote, team player, that she's now playing the inside game, that she started off as someone who pretended to be a dissident to Democratic Party politics and establishment orthodoxy, and instead has become one of the most valuable instruments of the Democratic Party, someone who's completely loyal to the Biden administration, who almost never critiques Democratic leaders or Democratic Party orthodoxy. And so the movement that formed around Bernie Sanders and AOC, the media outlets and the media figures who got rich by branding themselves as followers of Bernie and AOC, who pretended to be edgy, dissident outsiders to Democratic Party politics, have followed AOC and Bernie into captivity into the Democratic Party, to the point where when Joe Biden wanted $40 billion more for the war in Ukraine, back in May of last year, every single Democrat, from the more establishment conservative wings to the moderate wing to the supposed left wing of the Democratic Party, led by Bernie Sanders and AOC, every single last one of them fell lockstep into line and unanimously voted yes, in partnership with the establishment wing of the Democratic Party, people like Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, to vote yes in support of sending $100 billion of American funds, in that case $40 billion, to fuel the war in Ukraine, to enrich the CIA, expand their authority, enrich Raytheon and General Dynamics. There is no longer any internal debate within Democratic Party politics or the mainstream left liberal faction, by which I mean the faction that follows Bernie and AOC, and at the end of the day is nothing more than Democratic Party loyalists. The exact opposite is true when it comes to American conservatism and the Republican Party, where there is vibrant and often extreme and hostile debate within the party and within American conservatism, not about ancillary issues, but about the most important issues of the day, starting with the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine, which Joe Biden himself says is the event that has brought the planet closer to nuclear Armageddon than any moment since 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Republican establishment, led by Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, stood in line behind Joe Biden in lockstep with every Democrat and voted yes to support that war, send your money to Ukraine to fight over who governs various provinces in eastern Ukraine. But the only no votes came from a pretty substantial and yet a still minority populist wing of the Republican Party, with 6 or so House members led by Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and numerous other populists who don't support American imperialism or wars fought on behalf of countries in which the American people have no direct interest, along with 11 senators including people more associated with the populist right like Josh Hawley, who voted no. So you see this debate from one issue after the next. The question of whether Julian Assange should be pardoned for his truth-telling and confrontation with the American security state, whether the NSA should be given greater spying powers, whether the CIA is a benevolent institution whose authority should continuously increase along with their budget. From one issue after the next, the only debate we have in mainstream US politics takes place within the Republican Party and on the right-wing, conservative wing of the Republican Party. That debate doesn't exist in mainstream Democratic Party politics. You can find it in the marginalized left, the kind of people I often bring on my show, like Norman Finkelstein, who was on my show last week, or Nick Cruz and others from the Revolutionary Blackout Network who I've had on my show, people who do not fall in line and urge their followers to go and vote Democrat no matter who it is, even in the bluest of states like Gavin Newsom. But other than them, and it's a very small and inconsequential faction, unfortunately, the mainstream liberal left, the mainstream Democratic Party are not only completely in lockstep and unified with one another ideologically, but with the government and with the corporate media that serves that part of the Democratic Party. CNN, MSNBC, NBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, there's almost no differences ever. They're just over there unified, in unison, the kind of lockstep behavior that they falsely accuse the American right and conservatism in Fox News of being driven by. In reality, it's pure projection. That's that part of American politics. It's the reason it's become so worthless. They're subservient, there's no critical thought, and there's never any challenge to leaders. They're a movement of followers. And what the Tucker Carlson program represented, being at the key hour of Fox News that kicks off its prime time at 8 p.m., what has always been the anchor of Fox, as I said, Bill O'Reilly, the previous anchor of Fox News, the most rated, highly rated host who occupied that position. The fact that Tucker Carlson is now there is amazing and important because his show is about little else than dissent, not from the establishment Democrats, but from the establishment Republicans and their ideology of endless war and militarism and corporatism. He not only expresses and advocates, but constantly airs the kind of dissent that left liberals in the United States falsely tell themselves they represent. There is no dissent, no dissidence in the mainstream left liberal wing of the Democratic Party, thanks to Bernie Sanders and AOC. It exists only in the populist right, among the people who were shaped by the Trump campaign, and it was anchored in the media by Tucker Carlson and his program at 8 p.m. And removing Tucker Carlson from the airwaves doesn't just mean that Fox is removing the most popular host in the history of cable news, though it does mean that. It means that they are removing from the air the only person on television, on mainstream television, who would air dissent on a huge number of crucial issues. As I said, Laura Ingraham does it as well now. Jesse Waters does it sometimes. A couple other people on Fox do it. But in terms of just relentlessly and intensely forming his worldview based on increasing levels of radical dissent from establishment orthodoxy, there is no one on television who was doing what Tucker Carlson was doing. And it is almost impossible to believe that that didn't play a major factor in why he's gone. Fox News is led by the Murdoch family still, and they have made very clear that they've become embarrassed by some of the things Fox has been doing. Although ironically, that embarrassment typically is about things like Fox hosts insisting that there was fraud in the voting machines, for which Fox News just paid close to $1 billion to Dominion in a defamation lawsuit. And yet Tucker Carlson was never one of the people affirming that after the election. Quite the contrary, he was one of the few with the willingness on television to sometimes alienate his own audience by telling them when they did not want to hear it That people like Sidney Powell has never presented evidence to substantiate her claims, and that until there's evidence presented, nobody should believe what she's saying. So in almost every issue, one after the next, you found dissent on Tucker's show, oftentimes views that the liberal left traditionally had expressed but no longer would, that only this program would. So let me just show you a couple of examples, and obviously we have to begin with the war in Ukraine, because from the very beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine back in 2022, Tucker was essentially the only person on television. And again, Laura Ingraham did it too. I don't mean to downplay her, but Tucker was really the one night after night after night front-loading this question of why should the American people be willing to spend huge amounts of our resources on this foreign war in a country in which we have no vital interests, all while risking escalation. And as a result of that, he constantly got called a Russian agent. He was put on an official list of the Ukrainian government along with people like myself and Tulsi Gabbard and Brazil's President Lula da Silva. Ironically, Lula has become a world leader, questioning this war over and over, and the only one who really shares that view or airs that view in American media has become Tucker Carlson. So let's just look at one example of a countless number of examples in which Tucker started his show off by looking in the eyes of his audience, millions and millions of people, and asking the question that almost never gets asked when it comes time to support a new war and spend billions and billions of dollars on it, which is, how do American people benefit from this war other than the tiny little sliver of elites in the intelligence community and the arms manufacturing industry?
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Well, it looks like you're going to get a hot war with Russia and China, whether you want one or not. Yesterday morning, an American Reaper drone went down over the Black Sea. We still do not know exactly what happened. We're not going to lie to you. We don't know, and we don't expect to find out anytime soon, if ever. The Biden administration says it knows. It says the unmanned drone was harassed and damaged by 2 Russian fighter jets over international waters. That's all we have. We're going to have to take their word for it. Everybody else seems to be. Lindsey Graham didn't ask many penetrating questions. No, he moved immediately, seized the opportunity to demand that the Pentagon attack the Russian Air Force. Here he is.
Well, we should hold them accountable and say that if you ever get near another U.S. set flying in international waters, your airplane would be shot down. What would Ronald Reagan do right now? He would start shooting Russian planes down if they were threatening our assets.
What would Ronald Reagan do? Ooh, good question, Senator Graham. Ronald Reagan's 2-term presidency was notable for the fact that he did not declare war on the Russian Air Force, and therefore the United States did not go to war with Russia. And millions of lives were saved as a result. That's not a small thing. But one in the Reagan win column there, another president they told you was a...
Now, notice there, he did not choose as the person he could attack or would attack a leading Democrat or a leading Democratic senator, as he easily could have done, given that what Lindsey Graham is saying about the war in Ukraine is something almost every member of the Democratic Congress, from AOC and Nancy Pelosi to Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer, have said from the start. He instead purposely chose a member of the Republican establishment because more often than not, the target of his critiques was the Republican establishment, were Republican establishment leaders. When is the last time you have ever, or would ever, on MSNBC or CNN, see a host so devoted to constantly attacking leading Democratic senators or leading members of the House of Representatives from the Democratic Party? Never. The only time you ever see a Democratic lawmaker criticized on those other networks or on the op-ed pages of the Washington Post or the New York Times is when, on the very rare occasion when someone like Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema has the audacity to oppose something Joe Biden wants. And then they get attacked for being disloyal to the Democratic Party. Tucker's not attacking Lindsey Graham for disloyalty to the Republican Party. Lindsey Graham is expressing the views of the Republican establishment, of what most Republicans believe. So to have an 8 o'clock show on Fox, primarily devoted, or at least overwhelmingly devoted, to dissecting and critiquing and dissenting from the core views of the Republican establishment is something remarkable on television, especially given how partisan and polarized our media has become. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.